but that's something you may think about. So I'm going to today, like I said, use this 1.5" 16 gauge catheter. When your hands are sterile, so when I have my sterile gloves on, it doesn't make sense for me to do this to hold off the vein, right? Because you'll see, you cannot feed in the guide wire and put the catheter over it with one hand. No matter how strong and flexible your fingers are, you cannot do it with one hand. So you need to keep your fingers and your palms sterile. So the way to do that is you can hold off with the back of your hand. And you want to hold off far enough down that you don't poke your hand with the needle. And what if I don't poke my hand? What if I just hold off here and I poke the needle in? So let me just put it in and then you guys can tell me. So what if I'm like this?
You can't push it down.
Right, I can't really push it down. Why? What'll happen?
You're going to bust the vein because it's...
Right, so Teresa said that if I push this down, I may basically bust the vein. So I may come out the other side of the vein on the superficial aspect. So if I'm pushing in here, it may be like getting a piercing, right? It may come out the skin right above where my hand is. So you need to think about how long is the stylet that you're using to introduce your catheter. Okay, can I borrow you to just hold this horse real quick? Okay, so we have our access to the vessel, right? So we're going to make sure our hands stay up and sterile. The next thing that we need to do is grab our guide wire. See how there's a J loop at the end of this? Can you see that at all? Oh, where's my hand? There's my hand. See, it makes a J like a fish hook. To get that to go through our needle, we have to make that straight. It won't go, because otherwise I just hit and it bends. Beep, beep, beep. So what you can do is when you pull back on these, just seat it so the tip is coming out. From there, so you can let go of your vessel, right? Because we don't want it to just keep gushing blood with a lot of pressure. So from there, we're going to line up our stylet and our guide wire. I should have gotten a shorter horse. Okay, so what I'm going to do is use my pointer finger or whatever finger you're comfortable with, and you push to insert that guide wire into the vessel. Some of these do not have a guide wire that has a little channel like that. You may have one that just has like a tip that goes into the needle itself. So for those, what you're going to do is you actually push with your fingers like that, okay? So how do I know where to stop? How far do I push this wire in?
Theoretically, you held it up to see how far you needed first.
So theoretically, we need to understand how long is the wire and how far do we want it to go in. What is the max? We don't want it to go past what? Right, so we don't want to go past the thoracic inlet. We don't want it to end up in the heart. But there's another part of that. We also need a certain amount to stay out, right? Because we have to hold on to it. And once we get this catheter over it, if I took this off and fed the catheter and my wire ended right here, there's no way I can hold on to it, right? So theoretically, my wire could shoot out and go into the heart. If that happens, my heart may actually shoot out of my body because I'm going to panic. So what we need to think about is, what is the length of this channel that the wire is in? So if we know this is it looks to me like over a foot. So maybe somewhere around 14-ish inches. You don't want to take this out of the guide loop and put it against your patient before you start because it's going to get contaminated, right? I want to know if this is enough out to feed in my catheter. If it's not, if I've gone in too far, so see, you can see it coming out down here. If I've gone in too far, on the horse it's usually okay, on an adult horse, because they have a very long neck. You're more concerned if you have this size wire on smaller animals. But let's say I went in too far for me to place this catheter and grab the end. What do I just need to do? It's easy. Pull it back out, right? So that's another thing that if it happens, it's not a big deal. You can correct this on Monday because I was talking too much. The catheter will not go in if your stylet is still in place. You must remove your stylet. So hold on to your guide wire because you don't want that to go away. Remove, and you can switch your hands or do whatever's comfortable for you. Remove your stylet and hang on to your guide wire. At this point in time, if you have not made a skin incision, you may need to dilate the skin. If you need to do that, there are these dilators inside, and you load them the same way. You're just going to keep all this stuff sterile. Put it over your guide wire. Make sure, so I'm holding my guide wire down here with my fingers while I let go and grab it at the top. So at that point in time, I dilate the skin, and then I'm just going to take that off.
For that, you don't actually go to the vessel, right? You just go far enough
Right,
to, okay.
right. Okay, so the next thing, I need to figure out how to keep this guide wire sterile and hold this catheter in a sterile fashion. So you're going to insert the tip of the guide wire through. So you notice this catheter came with injection caps on the end, right? So what would happen if I just keep pushing, because this happens to beginners and people who aren't paying attention. Let's say I let go and I'm right here. Am I grabbing my guide wire anywhere? No, I'm not. And my guide wire is actually only stopped right here where my thumb is. So I need to think about, before I let go, I need to have the guide wire come out. Even if it was long enough, if I don't have the cap taken off of this end, it doesn't matter how long it is, it's just going to hit there and stop, right? So I can take that off before I start, or I can take it off while I'm feeding in my catheter. The guide wire here. You can see that. So from there, I can either keep it curled and feed it in, or I can straighten out. Whoa! I can straighten out and just hold the top. When you're feeding it in, a hand-eye coordination thing you'll have to think about is you're not pushing this everything as a unit. Because we have our guide wire at the top, right? So if I hold the guide wire in the top of the catheter and push it all in together, I'm just advancing the guide wire as well, right? So instead, what I'm going to do is hold the guide wire tight, and I'm going to advance the catheter down the guide wire. I'm trying to do it so you can see. Down the guide wire and into the vessel. When you begin, this one is a little bit easier because it's a very large guide wire. When you get to the 4, 4.5, and 5 French catheters, they're in small animals, the guide wires are thinner than the thinnest guitar string. They're very, very, very thin. So if you're not familiar with guitars, it's about the size of a strand of your hair, but a little bit stiffer. So you can imagine if I push up here and try to push it into the hole, see how the catheter is just bending? I'm too far away. So you'll have to troubleshoot and think about how close, if you can see how close my fingers are. My fingers are really close to where this catheter goes in, and I'm probably advancing maybe 3 millimeters at a time on this guy. Once it's seated, it goes a lot faster. But getting that initial part of the catheter seated, you take your time. It's the more deliberate you are, the less problems you're going to have. Okay, so can you guys appreciate, even though it's dark, can you appreciate that the catheter is seated all the way into the jugular? Okay, now what can I do? Pull out my guide wire. It's a good idea to practice just keeping everything sterile because you never know when you're going to pull out your catheter or when something's going to happen. So then I can put back on my hold on. Try! Caleb said working around me was like bird box. You have to walk around like this. So I need to put my injection cap on here. There is another time where you may not seat it all the way. So I want you to think about that as you're working. Remember I said this one was a shorter catheter and some of them are much longer? That's another pre-planning piece you'll have to think about. How long is the distance from your insertion site to your thoracic inlet? Because some of them are about, let's say like this long. And when that happens, I go into my planned site. And you guys may be able to see on this catheter, there's notches. You guys see that, the black marks? that are on there. So that helps you measure where you want to be. Some of the catheters, they actually have millimeter, like numbers of millimeters. Some of them are just dots. So you can plan where you want to be, and if you only want, so this one has a 15 mark. So let's say I wanted to go here instead. What I'll do is put this little, I called it a bumper on the worksheet, but you put that on, and you can put the cap on top of it, and then when you suture it, see how the holes line up? You're going to suture that on. And then you have your catheter that's inserted to the appropriate length.